There we go. All right. So hello, everybody. Welcome along to the week 2 wrap for Research Integrity and Practice. My name's Kerry, and we have a couple of our lovely participants from the module that are here today, and we're going to all discuss together the discussion questions. So thank you, everyone who's been able to join us. And to start, I would just like to acknowledge the traditional owners. The Queensland University of Technology acknowledges the Turrbal and Yagara as the First Nations owners of the lands where QUT now stands. We pay respect to their elders, laws, customs and creation spirits, and recognise that these lands have always been places of teaching, research and learning. QUT acknowledges the important role Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people play within the QUT community. Okay, so what I thought I would do is just go into our week 2. So transparency and recognition, as you all know. And I'm going to share my screen. There we go. All right, so you can see that okay, can you now? Yep, all right, perfect. All righty, so let's go firstly. Well, of course, the learning objectives obviously are around transparency and recognition. Let's go to the poll. All right, so the contact tracing app that was developed. So those, I know that some of you aren't here in Australia, so I'm not sure if you knew about this, but at the beginning of the pandemic, that's what the federal government tried to get us all to download this app, and most people didn't really want to. So you can see there that the people that filled out the poll, you can see, yes, I want to be able to choose what is being shared and stored for me. Yes, if there is transparency, more people will feel safe taking the app. So nobody really said, oh no, I can, no one can, as was saying, no, I'll do anything with the app. So that was probably to be expected, as we're all researchers. Anybody disagree? Would you have put something else with the poll? No. Fair enough. So the other thing I think that probably played into the way a lot of Australians didn't want to download it, I think as well, was, I don't know if you remember, but in 2016 we had a census, and they got basically it got hacked, and it couldn't take all the information, and so people filled out the census, which is all of your information about your whole life, and it wasn't very secure. So, you know, it's things like that, isn't it, where you have a bad experience about something like that, then you're going to be certainly reluctant to. And also the fact that there was very little information about how all the information was going to be used. And also that was something interesting that those of you in Fiji, you have the app, is that right? Who do we have? Yeah, what?
Yes, we have an app, ma'am. It's a Fiji Care app.
And it's based on a similar thing. I think some of you said the Singapore one.
Yes, it actually is for location basis, where if you're a positive, or even if you're not a positive COVID patient, it's where you travel and they record all the places that you've been, together with some of your personal information there as well.
Yeah, and have many people in Fiji taken it up?
Yes, I think almost everybody has to have it, because if they go anywhere, the shops have these scanners that you have to scan through that app. So yeah, basically.
Okay. So over here, we're using QR codes where we scan and register that way.
Yes, same
Yeah.
thing with the
Oh,
QR code. Yeah.
you've got both the
Yeah.
app and the codes. Oh, wow. Okay. Fair enough. Interesting. I know that the way, so does the app there work the same? It was where the Bluetooth picks up the other people that are around you as well? Do you know? Because that's how the app here was going to work.
I'm not really sure, but I think it works similar way.
Yeah. Okay. But you haven't really had any outbreaks as such, have you? Or have you? And we just haven't heard.
Sorry, ma'am?
Have you had you haven't had many cases of COVID-19, have you?
We have recently, there was a rise in the cases. So we've got a lot of cases right now, but most of them are vaccinated now, fully vaccinated. Yeah.
Oh, awesome. That's so good. And so was the app then useful, do you think, to trace people? Do you think that it worked well in that situation?
To some extent, yes, I would say. Yeah, but I wouldn't say it was 100%.
Okay,
yeah.
Fair enough. Yeah, well, because I guess nothing is 100%, is it?
Yeah, true.
Okay, interesting. All right, so that really leads into this discussion that we had as the first discussion, looking at that article and why does transparency matter, particularly in public health initiatives. So yeah, that was sort of the theme through this. And also last week when we talked about that Bell lady with the not having cancer and saying that she did, that was quite terrible. All right, so basically, yeah, so the idea was to digitally contact, trace everybody where they went. And also, so the reliability of the app, we weren't too sure. And there was very little transparency about the privacy laws. And so there's this balance isn't there, between public health and people's privacy, you know. So it's quite an interesting when we throw in the idea of doing the research on top of that, as well as looking after the public. So you can see, so why does transparency matter in public health initiatives? So quite a few of you had some really great comments in here. So Hamish, we haven't got him here today, but he had a really good point that you, being the first one as well to put in the discussion about how, well, so many people have other apps like Facebook, you know, which is tracking you and you know, checking what you like, what you don't like, and all of those sorts of things. So that was, I thought, a really good point. But is Facebook it's not necessarily intertwined with public health, is it? But then the posts on Facebook related to public health are often problematic. So it's all very complicated, isn't it? You know, so people want to get information from Facebook, don't they? And they have that app, but then, oh, but I don't want to get this other app because what are you going to do with my data? So I think that's something that's pretty troublesome, I suppose, with all apps, isn't it? And then, yes, no, quite a few of you said that Fiji has the same app that you're using. And a lot of you also talked about the fact that transparency leads to trust. So I think particularly when it's around our health, we want to trust that the right things are going to happen. But then when there's a lack of transparency, especially from the government as well. Yeah, and I think they wanted to get this thing up and going very quickly, and so they weren't able to give good information about what was going to happen with the data. Does anybody else have anything that they wanted to mention around the idea of the transparency and that balance with public health?
I think the only thing other than I would say, like adding on to Hamish, is that like I don't think it's even just Facebook,
No.
but even like if you get in your car, like every single time I leave my house at 7:30, it will say I'll arrive at work without me putting in I'm driving to work. I'll arrive at work in like 47 minutes. So it knows It knows where I'm going just because of my normal routines, because my location's on. So even with that, with the whole Bluetooth business and it pinging, I guess, other people that are around you, they already, that data is already out there as to where we are, because our phones are telling us, and our cars are telling us where we're going, and can already redirect you on a route without you actually saying where you're going, because it can predict where you're going, because it's constantly storing that data.
That's it. Yeah.
And is that with consent or not? Because it's, I guess, because we probably aren't aware of how much is happening with that information. I only know from when I've had to do like Facebook ads from a work point of view, that I then realized how much I can click into. Like, I wanted to put out that I offered mental health programs in Ipswich for refugees that were adults, and I could literally zone in on that cohort of people for a sponsored ad to turn up on people's Facebook page where they lived in Ipswich, they were an adult and from a cold background.
Wow. Yeah.
Without them being friends with us. That you can get that information. So it's interesting what information's already out there, and there's no transparency on that, and we just accept it.
Yeah. I'm not on Facebook, but I do. Yeah, obviously you read about how data often gets somehow leaked out, but then, as you say, you can also seek it out as well. And Sumilesh has said that there are a lot of apps out there with the personal information, even an Apple ID, compared to human health apps. Yeah, it is. It's one of those things. And so with your phones and the data that is collected by your phones, as I understand it, and that's something that someone else said at some point, I think, as well. Maybe I've got it down here. Somebody was saying, basically, if you're not doing anything wrong, what does it matter if your data is collected, which is true. But if the police are interested in your whereabouts, I'm pretty sure that they can get a subpoena and access your phone and get all the data to know there. So again, if you're doing the right thing, yeah, perhaps it shouldn't be so much of an issue. But again, it's different, the police accessing your data to find out something around a crime, to just anybody, and also people that big companies that want to market to you as well. You sort of, does that ever happen to you guys, where you get an email or a text message and you say, I never contacted that company, how do they have my information? And it's potentially just something you've clicked on somewhere sometime. So yeah, it's a fine balance, isn't it? Because with the COVID situation, it's everybody's health, isn't it? As opposed to maybe just a certain group, which is still important, of course, but to have that, to know that your data is safe. But with COVID, unfortunately, it's everybody. So that's affected. But yes, thank you to everybody for your discussions. They were all really great. All right, so let's move on. I wanted to ask you guys about this one, the transparency in reporting research. So you can see here that there was sort of a bit of a template and some questions around giving a clear explanation of how you went about your research or are going to. Did anyone want to talk about any issues that they've had or anything they want to share? You don't have to go through every one of those questions, but you might have had some good experiences or some experiences that you learned from. Did anybody want to add anything there?
Just the previous comment, they made me think of a movie called The Circle in Netflix. Have anybody watched it? It's really good. It's starring Tom Hanks and Emma Watson. So back in 2007, but I think they're still playing it in Netflix. So it's about a community of a computer company that is very transparent. It's reporting all the users' activities, so much like Facebook, but then time it probably 100 times. And then there is some tragedy at the end, and that really spoiler alert really, but it's about how transparency is good at one point, but overly transparent could also be damaging.
That is interesting. So what would overly transparent be? Give us an example from the movie.
So in the movie, Emma Watson lives 24/7 with a camera attached to her shirt. So it will go everywhere she goes and be an ear to all the conversations that she's going through. And so it's like she has Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, all of the streaming live all the time. But the company, The Circle, argued that it's really good because when people are doing right things, there's nothing to worry about. Exactly your point, Carrie. And they up it a notch by finding criminals through face recognitions. So if everybody's wearing that camera and everybody's capturing faces, you will get to locate like maybe a predator somewhere, and within a few minutes, and they run it, and it got like a sex offenders caught really in 20 minutes everywhere in the world. So overly, I think that's the overly transparent.
So are people watching Emma as the character, obviously?
Correct. Yes. So
right.
they're watching, and so Emma goes home to and everybody's watching what she's seeing, and there was some inappropriate moment. She accidentally had a look, but everybody saw it too, and that was overly transparent. And she has a person who really likes his privacy, but because she's his friend, then that privacy is tampered with as well. So although she expressed her consent and people have intruding to her privacy, the people around her does not. And so her being in the people's life really impinging on the other people's privacy.
Yeah. Okay. That's interesting, isn't it? Yeah. It's like when famous people like footballers get video doing things that they probably didn't want to be videoed doing. And because everybody does, they have a video camera in their pocket with their phone. So yeah. Okay, thanks for telling us about that. And Lisa's just added that it's leaving on the 14th of October if anyone wants to watch it. All right, so anybody wanted to add in about their transparency in reporting their research methodology? Does anybody want to add anything? No, that's all right. So I was just going to share my experiences really quickly, I've done case studies in the past. So, and as Lisa, you were saying, when you are working with humans, some are easier to get the ethical clearance because of the ethical issues. So I had uni students, so that wasn't too bad, but they were students and I was a teacher. So I had to declare to them that I was a teacher. I wasn't their teacher, but again, that was something that I had to be very transparent about. And also to gain their trust so that they knew if they told me about experiences with other teachers that I wouldn't go running to those other teachers and say, oh, guess what, blah, blah said. So that was something that I had to be very careful of. Yep, Lakshi.
Yeah, I was going to say, this is also relating to ethics as well, that as I mentioned before, I had to change a lot of things.
Yeah.
I had my ethics approved, but a lot of things changed after that because I had to do several changes to the research design and the data collection approaches and things. And every time I did have to go back to the ethics committee and say, I'm making these changes, so they had to approve it, which is a very good way of keeping the transparency, so they know what they approved, and anything I change, or like going from a case study to just doing interviews with event organizers, I had to go and tell them this is how many interviews I'm wishing to conduct, and these are the people I'm going to interview. And because they're event organizers as well, they do have a lot of affiliations with big brands, big names, sponsors, things like that. So those, I had to declare those as well, if what I would do if they had any sponsorships and interest in like business or like the financial field. So I just wanted to say that it is a good way of keeping transparency. And also I do keep like a diary, which is just a Word document where I actually write everything I do. Like I'll put the date, and any changes I do, I'll put it there, just like notes. So I know in the future when I'm writing up my method section, these are the things I did and on these days. So it will be helpful me in the future.
Yeah, very good tip, because we think we'll remember and we won't, because so much happens.
No.
That's a really good tip, to have a diary to talk about those things. So yeah, and the thing with ethics is that, you know, when they send it back and say we want more information, it's because you know, maybe you haven't been clear enough, and they want to understand your study, and it's all to help in the end, and also to make sure that the methods and everything you implement is to the standard that it needs to be. So yeah. I also had surveys, and I wanted them to be anonymous, and I was really lucky that I sort of went old school and I did it via paper, so that they were definitely anonymous. And the only reason I was able to do that is because I had the participants captured in a lecture theatre. So I was able to go in and hand them out and then collect them back. And their informed consent was basically by filling it out. They were giving informed consent. And I had a lot of interview data with the case studies. You know, when you do interviews, one of the ways you can have the transparency is by getting member checking. So having somebody else check the transcriptions, or even the participants themselves. But of course, you know, that's going to take time. So that was, I guess, a limitation that I had to say, was that I did all the transcribing and I did the interpreting, you know. So there's every step of the way, isn't there? You have to be thinking about the safety of the participants and making sure that everything's reliable and valid, and the transparency, and that you're, you know, doing everything the correct way. So, and as we've been seeing already in the material, there's a lot of guidelines and codes and things like that. So a lot to consider. All right. So let's go to our next discussion. So this scenario was an interesting one. How do you guys think we pronounce this lady's name? Is it Fong? That's what I've said. So hopefully it is Fong. All right, so let's have a look. So she was working for the government, which is interesting. There would be a lot of protocols within a government department, of course, and it was around the app. And so we're looking at the kinds of policies, guidelines, and approvals that Fong might need to consider. So again, a lot of you commenting, which was really great. I can probably shut this and make that, there we go, that's better. All right, so Divnesh was saying I know you're right there. If you want to jump in, Divnesh. No. Basically, there was a whole lot of things that she was going to have to consider, wasn't there, regarding the transparency and the intellectual property. That was a really interesting one that quite a few of you mentioned. I liked that. That was, and, you know, obviously, if you're the one that's developed it, and not only the IP, all the financial outlay that she would have already used for that. So is she going to get the money side of it? I thought was pretty hard to navigate. How's the data going to be stored? That was another interesting one. And now, interestingly, right at the end, both Hamish and Tyrone said, no, she can't do this. She can't use her app, which is sort of where I was thinking, you know, I really, you know, I didn't think that she would be able to do it, but we saw in the next scenario that she was. Were you guys surprised by that in the next scenario? Or were you not as surprised? Anybody? So clearly she put the tender in, having organised and developed the app. But yeah, I just thought because she was working with the government, the conflict of interest would be too much. Did anybody have a comment to make about that?
And I think because the research project is also surrounding health, public health, and also her app is a fitness app that is actually geared towards all to the general health and all that. It is interesting that she did get the approval to use the app because that is a very big conflict of interest. How she developed the app and then her work with the research would, I would think it would clash and will be a big conflict of interest. Yeah.
Yeah, well, working for the government, there would be rules about how you could earn income outside of your job. And so, I mean, if you had your own business on the side, you would have to declare that, I would assume. I mean, I guess it was completely different, you know, if you had a coffee shop or something, but even then, I don't know. Yeah, I was like, oh yeah, there's no way she can get that. And then of course we know that she does.
And at the same, sorry.
No, you go.
At the same time, is the research helping the app for development, or is the app actually helping the research development? That is, I think that's a big issue. How she's going to clear cut, this is for the app development and this is the research project.
Yeah, and you mean in her day-to-day job?
Yeah. And
yeah,
also
exactly.
the combination of those two is not clear at all.
Yeah. So realistically, when she's at her job, she shouldn't be working on the app. So yeah, no, good points. Everybody had good points about, you know, but yeah, in the end, as we know in the next one, that she did get the tender, which was an interesting outcome. But anyway, anybody else have anything they wanted to add? Nope. All right, let's keep going. So the last the last scenario was a really interesting one around the recognition, particularly in this case of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. And there's, as you can see through here on the screen, how much there is now. All of this would only be recent. Now that people have realized that this is something that's very important regarding ethics, of course. So here we can see the discussion 3. And based on our new information that Fong got the tender, and it went really well. And so now they're saying, this could be really useful for a project we're doing to try to help Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and diabetes, to reduce the diabetes. So sounds like a good idea, doesn't it? And then in the discussion, so based on this new information, what does she need to consider in relation to recognition? And everybody in the discussion said she's got to consider everything. There was so many things, like you can see in here, Divna, she did a really good job with all of the different codes and the statements, Carl as well. It was quite a lot. So, and then Lily had a good point too about the appropriateness and making sure that everything was culturally acceptable, all aspects of the research, of course, and then the app as well. And Lakshi as well, you said about basically you need to reassess the entire process. You couldn't go with the way they'd implemented previously, that whole, everything from beginning to end. And then Hamish's point right near the end, he brought up something really good as well, in that, well, okay, so, but don't forget it's potentially being implemented with a small group within the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. So we'd also need to think about, well, who exactly and what are their cultural values as well. So there's sort of two things happening there regarding who exactly, you know, is going to be targeted with this. So yeah, I think all of you had really excellent points and really showed a great understanding of the issue of research with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and making sure their values and beliefs are recognised. And of course too, something and why this has been, you know, focused on a lot nationally is because previously when research was done in these communities, the benefit to them was never really articulated, and often they may not have benefited. So that's something that's really important. There has to be a benefit. In this case, we would hope a reduction in the diabetes and being able to reduce the effects, the negative effects that diabetes has. So obviously that, but you can't necessarily guarantee that, can you? So, and I think too that for these researchers, these pretend researchers there, it's all very well to look up those codes and those guidelines, but I would say that they would probably need to go and talk to some people, maybe in the Department of Health, Human Research Ethics, or maybe go out into the communities to see, you know, and talk to them. Of course, it does say in the scenario that some people in the research team had experience, but I think even then, unless they themselves are from that particular community, I think it's very hard for them to say, oh yeah, that covers everything. I think they'd have to have some kind of consultation as well. Yeah, so anybody have anything you wanted to add there? Anyone had any experience researching with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders? No. I know, so who else is researching humans? Lisa, Lakshi, Natalia, were you? Yeah, yeah.
Yes, in my other work, I volunteer in a board of a charity foundation that works across countries, so across 16 countries, and what they do when they deal with different cultures to really have a different those culture to be on a team, like a local partner team. So that's to ensure how the beneficiary voices get across and how we really understand them and to be culturally responsive to their needs. So imagine Fong would establish some sort of a core team that also consults with the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities although the supervisor had that experience, like you said, it is very different when we have the people really be involved in the development of the app for their own community.
Yeah, great. Lopa, you know you're still there, and you were saying in your chat that you're researching surrogacy. So again, I think that's something that would be a lot to think about regarding transparency, what you're going to do with the data, and making sure that everybody's safe and looked after if they're being part of your research. Did she pop something in? Yeah. I know Micah and Divnesh, you're not quite researching humans, but I'm sure you've got to be very transparent with everything that you're doing in your studies as well. Simalesh, what about you? Are you there?
Ma'am, I won't be interacting with humans that much, only with the pearl oysters.
That's
so, yeah.
Of course, I forgot. But even so,
No.
but then you've also got the environment to think about as well.
Yes, we have.
Yeah. So, you know, I think if we want to sum up everything we've talked about regarding the transparency, as researchers, of course, we've got so many bits and pieces and different moving parts to think of. And all of this is things that would come up during those ethics applications. And it sounds to me that all of you are thinking of all of those things, and which is really important. Lisa, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I was just going to say that something that obviously I've not done my ethics yet, but very mindful of with transparency, and it comes a little bit to what I think the discussion too was, that in the National Disability Insurance Scheme world, that's all fee for service. So so a person that has a disability would get a plan and they choose who their service provider is. So in my day job, I'm a manager of an NDIS service provider that works with refugees.
Right.
And then as my research, I'm asking you about people's experiences of how they've been able to get NDIS, because I know that it's exceptionally hard to become an NDIS participant, and because of the evidence and everything they have to be able to provide and what that may be. But I think it's like that transparency that I'm going to have there to say that there's no financial gain in this, because essentially there could be people that I would interview who are still in the application stages. Because of that interview, potentially they could gain trust with me and know, because it's a very small world and people would know who I am and where I am, and they'd only have to find me on LinkedIn or Google, and they'd be able to see where I work. That then potentially, if they then got a plan in the future, they could come to me. So I am really mindful of that. And as well, I'm linked to one of the largest settlement agencies on the Eastern Seaboard. So most people that have settled here as a refugee are going to be linked to the company that I work for, because we're the settlement agency. So there is all of that transparency that I have to be really mindful of, that I'm not seen as, like, with my employer hat on, I am definitely seen as a researcher, and can't, it's not here for employment to enhance business, I guess.
Yeah. And that's one of the things, isn't it, that oftentimes that is the way it works, is that you have a job that you're really engaged in and is fulfilling, and you think, I can see how I can make this better. I'd like to do some research in it. So yeah, that is.
Yeah, policies needs to change in the NDIA for sure. I don't want to research or writing about it.
Yeah, exactly. So as you say, you know, and it was the same with me. If you're transparent and you do everything you can to make sure that the participants are safe and looked after, and that if they become uncomfortable and they think, I don't think I want to be part of that, then they are able to go. And, you know, and so for you, you don't want to make it that their application doesn't get accepted. which is pretty important. For me, it was that it didn't affect their grades, that by talking to me that they didn't get a lower grade or anything like that. So I think the main thing is that we're all aware and we're doing all the things to keep the participants safe and to have those ethical research projects. So it is nice, isn't it, to talk about these things and reassured that we're on the right track. Lakshi?
Yeah, I was gonna mention the point that was regarding to the scenario, the Aboriginal communities and things, but not just the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities, but when you're actually dealing with communities, one of the biggest issues is the representation, where people with a good voice or power will have a big say in things, and people who doesn't have that much power would be underrepresented. So that actually needs to be considered when recruiting participants for interviews, because that actually could affect your findings and your research results very, very much. So just having those mechanisms to have everybody engaged, whether they're high-ranking people in a community or whether they don't have enough power in a community, that is a big thing to actually consider.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, 100%. And you're right about that power. And so one way, I guess, that you can do that when you are putting forward interpretations of some sort of data or interviews that you collected with people in a community is to do that member checking and to go and say, okay, this is how the information you've given has been interpreted. Do you agree with that? So, and also making sure that they will have access to the research findings, so to speak, as well. So a lot of stuff going on where you really do have to look after your participants so well as a researcher. It's obviously from this module, we know it's one of the most important things. So yeah, very good. Well, thank you so much to everybody who's been sharing, and I hope that you've all enjoyed checking in with each other and seeing some real people rather than just sort of online words. Does anyone have anything that they want to finish up with before we go? We'll be meeting again next week. Let me just stop my share for a sec. When are we meeting next week? It's Oh, that was today. It's actually on Tuesday. So we haven't got long to wait at all. So there's a Q&A session on Tuesday the 5th. That's at 12 p.m. So hopefully you can come. If not, pop your questions in. I think Alexandra, she'll set that up. And yeah, we'll see each other all again on Tuesday, which would be great. Anyone else want to say anything? Nope. All good. Divnesh, Micah. You're all good, very quiet, but that's all right. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you.
No worries. Thank you for.
It was nice hearing the colleagues on their views.
Yeah, definitely is. And I must say, you're all writing really great and thoughtful discussions. So keep it up, because it's great for me too. I really enjoy reading them, and yeah, everybody's very thoughtful, and I can see really taking the whole module on board, which is great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Right. No problems. All right, we'll have
Thank you. Thank you.
No worries. All right, see you everybody. Thanks.
Bye. See you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Okay, so that's our wrap up for week 2. I hope you enjoyed the week 2 materials, and I will talk to you all next week.